Today we're going to go over the innovation decision process from Rogers' textbook. He presents a model which is easy for us to use, overlaying with different case studies or examples to understand the process that individuals or organizations go through in order to decide whether they adopt or reject certain innovations. First, we'll review the model itself. Prior conditions of an individual or organization that may exist and therefore influence how they move through the process include previous practice of that individual, felt needs or problems. In other words, do they perceive a need or problem that this innovation may or may not solve? Level of innovativeness of the individual or organization, and the social system norms for the system within which they exist. We all know those around us, or the society around us, has an influence on how we make decisions. Step one of the innovation decision process is knowledge. This includes exposure to an innovation and the individual or organization learning how it functions. There are three types specifically of knowledge. First is simple awareness of the innovation. Second is how-to use of the innovation. And third is principles knowledge. In other words, how the innovation actually works. There are a few different variables that may influence an individual's knowledge or an individual's exposure to different types of communication that they gain that knowledge from. These include socioeconomic characteristics, personality traits, and communication behavior. Each of these variables influences the degree to which an individual or organization may be an early or late knower. In other words, these characteristics may influence the level of innovativeness of the individual or organization. For example, an individual who tends to fall in the higher socioeconomic bracket tends to be more innovative and therefore tends to be an earlier adopter for many innovations. Following the knowledge step is step two, persuasion. This is a step in which the individual or organization essentially weighs the costs and benefits of potentially adopting the innovation. This includes how that innovation may or may not hold relative advantage to the person's existing behaviors or tools used, how compatible the innovation is with their life or needs, the level of complexity in the innovation. In other words, how hard is it going to be to figure out how to use it? The level of trialability of the innovation. In other words, if we can decrease the risk of investment and allow an individual or organization to try something out before they commit to it, they may be more likely to give it a shot. Examples of this in everyday life might include free trials in which a person signs up for a service for 30 days and allows themselves to try something out without having any real long-term commitment. This may impact how many on the backside of that 30 days sign up for a real service. And last is observability. Can it be seen or observed in real life? In other words, can I see my neighbor trying something out and therefore observe the risks or benefits without trying it myself? All of these items are ways that we might weigh costs and benefits to something new introduced in our lives, just like another individual or another organization may assess the benefit or cost of an innovation in their life. After a person has gained knowledge and gone through the persuasion process, step three is decision, and this is an action step. In step 3, the individual or organization chooses to either adopt or reject an innovation. If they choose to adopt the innovation, that means they'll move forward using it. If they choose to reject the innovation, they will move forward not having used it. It's important to note here that there are technically two different types of rejection according to Rogers' model. First is active rejection, in which a person has actively considered and informed themselves around the innovation. And second is passive rejection, in which the individual never truly considered or went through a deep process of gaining knowledge or the persuasion, costs, and benefits process, and still chooses to reject the innovation. The important thing to remember here is step 3, decision is an action step. After a person chooses to either adopt or reject an innovation, they move forward into step 4, the implementation step. In other words, exercising and evaluating the costs and benefits of the innovation. It's important to remember that this step is influenced by the action taken in step 3, the decision. For example, if I chose to adopt an innovation, I'm going to evaluate whether its purpose is being followed through in my life, and I may even choose to reinvent it. Reinvention is the modification of an innovation to better suit my needs. It may not be me using the innovation as intended by the innovator or the seller or marketer of that service or object, but I am technically still using it. I've still adopted it. I've simply adapted it to my specific needs. So in general, step 4, implementation, is evaluating the innovation while I exercise it and apply it in my own life. Finally, we need some closure to this model, and we end with step 5, confirmation. And this is where it gets a little bit more complex. In step 5, confirmation, an individual or organization seeks reinforcement for the decision that they previously made in step 3. Recall that was our action step in which we chose to either adopt or reject the innovation. From that action step, we have a couple of different options. If in step 3, we chose to adopt the innovation, we can either continue to use the innovation, likely because we see its value based in our implementation and evaluation that occurred in step 4, or we can choose instead to discontinue use of the innovation, likely because we did not see value or relative costs and benefits when we implemented and evaluated the innovation in step 4. Next, if we had initially chosen to reject the innovation in decision step 3, the action step, we have two options as well. We may be able to reconsider and be a late adopter. In other words, we initially chose not to adopt the innovation, but we've decided upon further evaluation that we're going to decide to implement that innovation after all. Second, if we initially chose to reject the innovation, upon implementation or observing others' implementation and evaluating the relative costs and benefits, we may choose to decide to continue that rejection. An important detail to note: if I initially chose in step 3 to adopt the innovation, and I decide after step 4 implementation that I'm going to discontinue use of that innovation, therefore I'm no longer going to use it, there are two different types of discontinuing use. Type 1 is replacement of the innovation. So in step 4, I've decided after implementing it and evaluating it, there's actually a better option out there for me. This would be, for example, I initially adopted a type of deodorant that I thought worked well, and after using it in step 4 and evaluating it, turns out it's not helpful to me, so I'm going to discontinue use and replace it with a superior brand. So that's the first type of discontinuing use. The second type of discontinuing use is called disenchantment. In other words, I'm no longer really enchanted with the type of deodorant I'm using, and I might not have a great replacement for it, but I just don't think it's really that great. So I'm going to no longer use it, even though there's not really a better option that's persuaded me to switch teams. So that brings us to the end of Roger's model. And it's important to note that in the book, one of the things that we talk about as being difficult about innovation research is the variable of time, because depending on where we draw our time window, how a person or organization moves through these steps is going to change. For example, if I draw out my time window 2 years from now, I might not have reached step 5 confirmation. I may still go back to evaluating the relative costs and benefits of an innovation and changing my mind after all in step 5 confirmation. So that's one of the things that makes research around this process a little challenging. In order to understand this in everyday life, I'm going to go through a couple of examples surrounding curbside grocery shopping. And I had this idea the other day when I was making my appointment to pick up my HEB order. So I have 4 individuals, each of which is going to move through the innovation decision model proposed in Rogers, all around the same innovation, so curbside or online grocery orders, but each person, because they're individuals, and they're each influenced by different prior conditions or different types of knowledge characteristics, is going to move through those steps a little differently. So example 1 is what we'll call the early adopter, my cousin Kristen. And to give some background to help fill in the blanks of prior conditions, Kristen is a busy working mom of 3. She works as a lawyer full-time. So we can assume that her felt needs and problems include a need for convenience, minimized hassle, and efficient use of time. Being a lawyer, she's relatively educated and in a higher socioeconomic bracket, so we can make the generalization that her innovativeness as compared to the general population is probably a little higher. She lives and operates in a more affluent area, and her social circles therefore are more innovative as well. Keep in mind that's something that influences her communication channels and where she gains her knowledge. Cost, again, is not a barrier to adopting an innovation. So, in the knowledge and persuasion steps, all of those variables influence how Kristen comes to know about grocery curbside ordering and how she comes to perceive the relative costs and benefits in her life. It's compatible with her needs. It's not complex in terms of what she's able to easily understand. She's willing to try it, and she's willing to observe it because her neighbors or the mothers of other children in the daycare center also try curbside ordering. So this lands her at the decision to adopt the innovation of curbside grocery. She moves to step 4, implements curbside grocery order, and upon evaluating it, decides that it allows her more freedom of time, more efficiency, and certainly less hassle than dragging 3 toddlers through the grocery store after she's worked a 10-hour day. Having evaluated the innovation in her life and the relative costs and benefits, she moves to step 5 and confirms her initial decision to continue use of curbside grocery ordering. So she continues to use curbside grocery order to this day. So that's one example of how one person with specific knowledge and persuasion attributes that influence how they move through these steps in Rogers' model might come to a conclusion. Next is example number 2. And I'll use myself here because I was a pandemic adopter of curbside grocery. My prior conditions and knowledge and communication channels were relatively similar, but I initially decided in step 3, curbside grocery order did not have enough relative costs and benefits based on persuasion, step number 2, to my life. I implemented that decision, deciding to not use curbside grocery order and evaluating that choice until an outside impact changed the relative costs and benefits of this decision made in step 3. In other words, the pandemic occurred and the thought of curbside grocery order suddenly became more enticing. Additionally, during that time, there was no added fee to do curbside grocery, so the level of trialability in step 2 increased. Then in my confirmation step, I've decided to stick with curbside grocery ordering, and I still use it to this day. That's an example of a little bit different movement through all of these steps with the same innovation. Example 3, we'll use my mother. And we can see here, this is an example of how time and the window of time in which we choose to evaluate how a person moves through the model changes. So recall that in the previous example, implementation was influenced by the initiation of the pandemic. So time occurred at implementation, a large shift. In this example, we're going to shift the time window to the implementation step being after the initiation of the pandemic. Let me explain. Example 3 is my mother, whose knowledge and persuasion steps were influenced both by Kristen and myself. She did not feel initial needs, but when the pandemic occurred, the relative costs and benefits of using curbside grocery certainly increased. Additionally, we talked about last example that the trialability of no charge or added fees during the pandemic incentivized some people to try curbside grocery for the first time. Additionally, there was observability in the fact that example 1, a family member was using this service. All of this led to my mother in step 3 decision making an action step to use curbside grocery. Here's where time makes a difference because we moved that decision up. The shift is during the implementation step when she was using curbside grocery and evaluating its costs and benefits to her life, the pandemic eased. And her decision in step 5, confirmation, discontinued use. Here's why. A new Trader Joe's opened up down the street, and she decided to discontinue use because of a replacement. So no longer was curbside grocery as enticing as the replacement of a new Trader Joe's, which she enjoys visiting in person down the street. So the pandemic was still an influence, but we've shifted our time window, and she makes a different decision in step 5, confirmation. Our final example, I will lovingly call a laggard. Example 4 is my Uncle Jess. His prior conditions include knowledge of the innovation in that his younger daughter, Kristen, uses the innovation himself. However, his social system norms influence a little bit different decision-making because as a retired person, grocery shopping is a social community activity for Jess. His socioeconomic characteristics, personality traits, and communication behavior all influence where he gets his knowledge from. And in step 2, persuasion, he weighs the costs and benefits, doesn't see a relative advantage because he likes his social time in the grocery store. And to him, it's not worth the extra hassle of trying to figure out how to order groceries from his phone. So in step 3, Jess, in his decision step, decides to reject the innovation of curbside grocery ordering. In step 4, he evaluates his choice, observes those around him who maybe made a different choice, and in step 5, confirms the fact that he indeed does enjoy his time strolling around HEB at 7 in the morning. Here's the catch. Say we draw this timeline out 5 years from now. I mentioned Jess is retired. He's older. At some point, what if he gets a knee replacement and the thought of walking around HEB isn't so enticing anymore? He may come back to the implementation and confirmation steps and decide on a different choice. However, because we've ended our time window at current state, right now, his confirmation step number 5 is continued rejection and not using the innovation of curbside grocery. So that's a little overview of Roger's innovation decision model from the book. In using an overlay of curbside or online grocery purchases in 4 different individuals to demonstrate how, depending on time, prior conditions, and personality traits, socioeconomic characteristics, or communication behavior, individuals move differently through these steps. And I'd just like to cite my references of where I gathered some background information before I end. Thank you.